Hi, all newcomers. We've got a few new people joining, so we'll just give it another couple of minutes. So everyone should be muted, and if you're not muted, can you just please mute your audio? But you are welcome to turn your video on if you'd like to show everyone your lovely face. But equally okay if you just want to keep your camera off and watch the webinar. Right, that's 4 minutes past, so I think we'll just get started, and then if anybody comes along late, I'll let them in.
Okay.
So, good evening, everybody. My name's Melissa Riley, and I'm the Development Manager with Lanark Community Development Trust, and we are the charity that manage Castlebank Horticultural Centre in Lanark. So thank you for joining us for our first webinar for World Environment Day today. And it's an international webinar, I think we can say, because we've got people here from all over Scotland, and we also have people registering from India and Dubai as well. So if anybody's actually joined us from those countries, then hello, and thank you very much for joining us. Webinar tonight is going to be led by my colleague Stuart Ritchie, who's the educational gardener at the Horticultural Centre. So Stuart will lead the presentation, and then at the end you can ask Stuart some questions. If you do have a question, could you please write it in the chat box, and then at the end I'll go through them all in the order that they've been asked. So I think that's everything. Just to say that we are recording the webinar today, so if anybody has to duck out early, then we will put up the recording on our Facebook page, and we can email it to you if you miss the end of it. So I think we'll just get started. I'll pass you on to Stuart, who will be leading tonight's webinar.
Okay, that's me. Good evening, everyone. I hope you can all see my screen. So I've got a presentation, so that should all be full screen for all of you, with maybe the images on the top right of your screen. So if they're too big, you can minimize those so that you can see the presentation in full screen. So the presentation, like Melissa said, it's World Environment Day, and the topic is about biodiversity and all about life on our planet Earth. So the way I see it is this is the greatest miracle in the cosmos, and it's currently under threat because of lots of different things. But there's many ways that we as people, perhaps we're the most influential species on the planet, and we can do lots of things to save it. So I'm going to start. Hopefully this works. Just click. There we go. So just a little bit about me. So I'm Stuart Ritchie. Like Melissa said, at the moment, I'm the educational gardener at Castlebank Horticultural Centre in Lanark. I'm trained as an ecologist, a botanist, and a horticulturist. And what I do is basically a mishmash of all those different things. I'll just say that everything that I'm going to say is based on the known science fact, and I will direct to different resources as I go through. All of the information that I've used comes from peer-reviewed scientific journals, so it's not gathered from the far reaches of the internet. That's important to say because we live in a time when information is shared really widely. Anyone can share information on social media, and we need to be really careful about the quality of that information, because often many of us will make decisions, maybe life decisions, based on information. And if it's not accurate and it's not being tested, then those could be bad decisions. And another thing is really prevalent in the world today is fact denialism. People actually denying facts. And I think our our president across the pond in America is definitely one of those people and is influencing millions of people in the US and around the world. So that's just a point I wanted to make about the sources of what I'm saying. If you've got any questions about the sources, then we're happy to talk about that afterwards. So just a quick picture. This is Castlebank Horticultural Centre. Here, it's just me and Melissa that are employed by the Development Trust. I am the educational gardener and I run programs with volunteers out in the wider park, which is a public park. And we also do lots of classes with lots of different groups in the community, including schools, right the way from 3-4-year-olds up into secondary, kind of 16-year-olds and school leavers. And what you can see in here is lots of our vegetable beds and polytunnels, where we're growing organic vegetables to teach about where food comes from. We're raising lots of plants for sale and for the wider park. So that's kind of the base. So I'll get started. What is biodiversity? This is the tree of life, representing 3 billion years of evolution. So the point right in the middle at the bottom, that's the start of Earth 4 billion years ago. If you go slightly to the right, just over 3 billion years ago, that's when we think life originated on Earth. And then this is a huge tree of evolution, all these different types of organisms evolving over that vast period of time. So this tree encompasses everything, all living things, bacteria, fungi, animals, yeasts, plants, all of it. And it's all on here. This is a picture taken by Apollo 11 astronauts on July the 20th, 1969. So all of it is on that small rocky planet. That's a real picture. And this is a real picture of our sun taken this year from the NASA Solar Dynamics Observatory. So this is one planet around one star, and our star is one of hundreds of billions in the galaxy, and there's billions of galaxies in the universe. So that's just given us a big perspective. How special is this life that's on our planet? As far as we know, it's the only planet in the universe that has life, as far as we know. So when I think of biodiversity, this is kind of the first image that springs into my mind. This is a coral reef. Here we have thousands of different species, all living together in complex communities. Ultimately, they're all dependent on one animal, and this is corals. These are tiny little polyps, which are closely related to jellyfish. And these corals produce a limestone skeleton, which creates enormous reefs. The largest in the world is the Great Barrier Reef, and this is 1,400 miles long. And this creates an entire structure in which thousands of other different fish and animals, algae can all live together. This is a picture from Blue Planet 2. This is a tropical rainforest. This is in Costa Rica. And then here, we've got about 500,000 different species. So these are plants, animals, 500,000, 500,000 in a country that's about the third the size of Scotland. Okay, so that's an enormous amount of living things in a very small space. Scotland, in comparison, has about 90,000 different species. So the tropics are extremely important in terms of holding the majority of this diversity of life. A bit closer to home for us in Scotland, this is Scottish temperate rainforest in Knapdale, which extends all the way up Scotland's west coast. And this is of global importance as well, because here there's a huge number of different mosses, liverworts, lichens, all these tiny plants that are covering all the rocks. They're found nowhere else in the world. And there's lots of different species relying on those as well. The big tree in the back, that's an oak tree, which is probably 300-400 years old. And there could be hundreds of different species relying on that one tree. So we've got to remember that everything in these different systems, they're all connected to each other. They all depend on each other, and they interact in very complex ways, okay? So if one disappears, then everything else is affected, isn't it? I'm sure most of us at school, you'll probably learned about food chains or food webs. That's only the very basics, because species interactions are infinitely more complicated than just what eats what. Just like a human, we can't survive without the millions of different bacteria in our stomach. We wouldn't be able to digest our food. And the vast majority of plants, they wouldn't be able to reproduce if all the pollinators disappeared. Without pollinators, we wouldn't get fruits. Without fruits and crops, then humanity can't survive. So there's a huge dependence also on keeping these systems intact. As soon as we lose one link, then the chain can collapse. And we know this from decades of research. This is just another quick picture. This is wildflower macaire on Uist in Scotland, one of the Outer Hebrides Islands. So even in very cold places, very exposed places, you get these beautiful communities of plants on which there are very rare insects, birds, that perhaps can only live in those small places. And they're found nowhere else in the world. So once they're gone, they're gone. And how many different species are there? Well, there's estimates somewhere between maybe 10 and 30 million different types of living things. So the whole tree of life encompasses that. Best estimates probably about 10 million. And actually only a small fraction of those are the animals, the big things that we see and notice. So it's the plants and the fungi and the bacteria, they're the foundation of everything upon which everything else depends. And life is everywhere. So this is a picture, this is the Simpson Desert in Australia. So an example of a very harsh environment. It gets baking hot summers, it's very dry all year. And this is to illustrate the point that even in recent years, just last year, we've found living things actually living inside rocks. So these experiments, these scientists, they went down in submarines to the very bottom of the ocean, and they drilled cores hundreds of meters down, and even hundreds of meters down inside the rocks, there's bacteria. Okay, so this is probably the best evidence we have yet that life can live anywhere on the planet. Absolutely every single surface on the planet is covered in life. So why shouldn't there be life on Mars, on the moons around Saturn and Jupiter, around other stars in the galaxy and throughout the universe? The probabilities suggest that there is, but there might not be. So we need to be really careful about what we do on this planet. So I challenge you to think of something more miraculous than that. We're sharing a planet with 10 million different types of living things, and it might be unique. And we often think of ourselves as special because of our intelligence. Biologically, scientifically, there's not much that's special about humans except our intelligence, but we're definitely part of this cosmic miracle. We are here, and we know we're here. So that's important. This is another picture, a bit further out this time. This is taken by the spacecraft Voyager 1 in 1977. So we can see the Earth and the Moon. This is a real picture. So you can see the distance between the Earth and the Moon. And we can see, well, everything again is on that tiny little rocky planet. And just a quick fact, Voyager 1 is now 13.8 billion miles from Earth. It's now left the solar system. Aren't we special? So this is kind of been humanity's viewpoint for the last hundreds and thousands of years. We are so intelligent, we're smarter than everything else, so we can do what we want, right? Can't we? No? But so it's true that humanity, we don't hesitate to destroy things for short-term benefits. If we need to build a car park, we cut the trees down. It's not a problem. If we want to build a road, we cut everything down, we clear the way. If we're building infrastructure, growing the economy, making money, that's what matters to most of humanity, at the detriment to the natural world. This is in sharp contrast to ancient human cultures. They planned far ahead. They saw themselves as really special as part of nature. They marveled at nature and the sky and the stars and thought about their part in it. Now we can't seem to plan more than a few decades ahead. Maybe that's down to our political systems or democracy, that there's always another election coming up. So the politicians and the government, they need to do short-term things, get results quickly. And it means there's not much planning for 20 years' time, 30 years' time. Think about 100 years' time. And that's, yeah, frankly, we're terrible at planning and looking after things. And that's evidenced when countries tried to come together and find some common goals on things like climate change. Often it just drags out for years and years and years because everyone has their own agenda. I want to touch on this, the distinction between intelligence and consciousness, okay? So intelligence, I'm going to define that. I'm going to say, in its most basic sense, intelligence is an ability to solve problems. So things like mathematics, language, social interactions, hand-eye coordination, complex thinking, that's all about solving problems. So said here, humans more intelligent than a mouse, that's obvious. A computer is also more intelligent than a human at certain things. Not generally, but a computer is definitely smarter than a human at maths. It can do it in a fraction of a second. A human can't. So just think that's intelligence. Then think about consciousness. What is consciousness? Define that again. So consciousness, it's an awareness of being aware. You're consciously aware that you exist. You know you exist, so you're conscious. And from my point of view, it's reasonable to assume that your cat or your dog is also conscious. They experience things, they have feelings, right? Maybe they don't spend their days thinking about existing and the universe, because that would require intelligence. But maybe they think about crazy things that we can't even conceive of, right? And I'm sure if there's any dog pet owners, they would agree that their dogs get moody, they feel pain, they have moments of joy. That's all part of conscious experience. So if we look at these four animals here, it's easy for us to compare the intelligence of these four things. And by the way, the orangutans in the top left, they're more intelligent than the human baby at this age, okay? So intelligence maybe isn't the be all and end all, but can you compare their consciousness? Can you say that the orangutan is not conscious and doesn't have the same feelings that the human baby has. Look at the picture that they're hugging. They're clearly family. They're being emotional, just like the dogs. Cats, we all know cats, they're a bit more moody and like their own space. That they're all conscious animals, and we can talk about it afterwards. Maybe you disagree, but I don't see how you can disagree with that. This is just a little thought experiment. So this was first proposed by a philosopher who published a paper in 1974 titled, "What is it like to be a bat?" And his paper is all about psychology and consciousness and mind, body, thinking about all these different things. So can you imagine that you're a bat? Bats use echolocation to navigate and to find food. So can you even conceive what the conscious experience is like for a bat? It's continuously mapping the entire environment. It can hear anything that's within a pin drop of hundreds of meters. It can move in 3 dimensions. So its experience is completely different to that of a human. And the most important thing is it's very, very difficult for us to actually conceive of what its experience is like. Okay? So this is the point I'm making. Us biodiversity, we could ask, well, why is it important to make sure that species don't go extinct? Well, maybe it's the only place in the world, in the universe with life, but maybe it's also the only place in the universe that has consciousness. Yeah. So if we do irreparable damage, then we're losing a huge part of the universe is dead without consciousness. Okay, so drink. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the depressing bit, about what we're doing to all of this, and then we'll get on to what we can all do to help. Okay. So this is pretty widely accepted now in the scientific community. There's been thousands of publications in respected scientific journals about this, about the Earth's 6th mass extinction. And we can all agree that this is happening now. And this is based on the extinction rate, how quickly species are disappearing versus the last millions of years. If we compare it to how quickly things have disappeared before humanity came along, then the extinction rate is about 100 times higher now than it has been for the last several million years. So, but you don't even need to know that fact. All you need to know is if you look at pictures of what the world looked like 100 years ago and read about how it looked maybe 2,000 years ago, then you'll quickly realize that the landscape is changing. There's a lot less forest. We have infrastructure now. We have big cities where we all live. And ultimately, this destruction, like I was saying before, it's carried out in the name of progress, economic growth, building infrastructure, apparently to benefit us. But I would argue that this progress is only progress if you have a narrow-minded and an uninformed position on the whole picture. And biologists, scientists, many people who aren't scientists can see how reliant we are on nature. Without nature, we wouldn't be here, and we are in fact part of nature as well. So we've got to protect it. So just a mass extinction is defined as an event where between 3/4 and 95% of all the species on the planet are lost forever, very quickly. So if we've got 10 million species, we would lose 9.5 million, and there would only be 500,000 left. So you all know about this. This is the 5th mass extinction event. And this is the one where all the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct in the blink of a geological eye. And we all know how it happened. So this colossal asteroid impact was the trigger. And ultimately, it wasn't the asteroid that killed all the dinosaurs. Sure, the asteroid killed some of them, but not many. It was the changes in the climate afterwards, which then meant that all of these enormous animals and about 90% of all animals living in the oceans went extinct. It's just a quick figure to show you the rest. So the first mass extinction, we think, happened about 445 million years ago, and then they've happened up until now. And now we're in the 6th mass extinction. So what's driving this one? Well, it's us. So because of our destruction of natural environments, this is a picture of Bolivia. At one point, this on the fringes of the Amazon, this would all have been rainforest. And it's just cleared completely. So as soon as roads are put in, the timber is all logged. Maybe they bring in cows, they graze it, but then because we've destroyed the natural cycle of things, the soil quickly dies, and then it's useless. So this is it's done because it's such huge areas, and we think, oh, we can take a bit of that, and it won't do that much harm because the Amazon's enormous. But if you look at it, pictures, especially even from satellites now, you can get daily updates of how much of the Amazon is disappearing, and it's rapid, very rapid. If you want exact facts, the State of Nature reports, these are commissioned by the UK government, and using data from about 50 different wildlife charities. So it's huge data sets about how things are doing, how birds are doing, bees, freshwater fish, all of that stuff, and it's all summarized, and you can see the figures for yourself. And this is just the UK, but there's also United Nations reports which give a more global picture. This is from the World Wildlife Fund Planet Report from 2 years ago. If you look at the plot on the left, so that's saying that since 1970, so 50 years, 60% of all vertebrate animals are gone, wild vertebrate animals. So the population's been cut by more than half. If you go back 1,000 years, that probably was reduced by 90% until 1970. So we're just, huge numbers of animals have basically been wiped out. And why is that? So in Scotland, in about the last 500 years, all of these animals have been hunted to extinction. So there's many countries in the world where large animals still actually live on the fringes of civilization. Got elephants in India and Africa and throughout Asia. Got lions, huge cats. You've got grizzly bears in North America and Russia and into Europe. And sure, they cause problems, but ultimately people live with them. But not so in the UK and throughout most of the so-called developed world. If there was a wolf, then it would immediately be shot because it could go and kill a lamb or whatever. right? So these magnificent animals are now extinct from the United Kingdom. Most of them still exist somewhere else in the world, but that relates to the plot we just looked at, in that most of the populations of these animals has been dramatically reduced. So climate change, we've known about climate change for a good 50, 60 years. It's only in the last 20 years that it's really started to get mainstream media coverage. But I'm sure we can all agree that the climate is changing now. I can't think of anywhere in the world, assuming you're more than 20 years old, you'll have noticed a change in the climate since you were a child. And all 5 of the previous mass extinction events, these have been the result of rapid changes in the composition of the planet's atmosphere. We know this. Like I said before, it's not the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, it was the new climate that killed them. Again, it's not the climate instability itself that's the primary reason we're losing the biodiversity. It's because of our, called it here, the economically expansive activities of humans. We need more space, we need more farmland, we want the resources, we need to mine, we need to build new roads, railways, airports, houses. Yeah, that all takes space. And then to feed all the extra people in all the growing cities, you need more land to have more cows and more pigs and more sheep, more crops. Okay, and that's obviously at the expense of nature. Many years ago, people thought, oh, the planet's so huge, there's no way that humans could impact it. Surely the resources are infinite, right? That's what we thought about the oceans. We thought, oh, there's so many fish in the oceans, there's no way that we could possibly damage it. And then we started building trawlers, which can go out for weeks at a time with nets that are miles across. And then in the last few decades, we've got fisheries collapse. So we've taken so many fish that the whole population just collapses. And that's basically what's happening with animals all over the planet. Okay, so that's the depressing bit over. So how can you help save this, which is I've called it the greatest miracle in the universe, the biodiversity, all these different types of living things and the consciousness that they all have. So I've broken them down into big changes and small things. It's quite important to distinguish between big and small, okay? And one of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us is that when it comes to changing things, we need to do big stuff, because small stuff, even though think about 50% of the world's population has been in some kind of lockdown, greenhouse gas emissions haven't came down very much. So the majority of the emissions and the industry is from the power generating industries, transport, moving food around, infrastructure. You driving a little bit less, sure, it all adds up, but it's the big things that are going to make a difference. And that's ultimately going to come down to governments working together and businesses acting more sustainably. Nonetheless, I've said here we should respect every living creature, because if every living creature is conscious, then they're all equally important. So the big actions, number 1, learn about it. Why? Because most humans don't care about things we don't know about, that we can't see or we don't understand. If you don't know about something, you don't care, all right? Simple as that, because you don't know about it. So by improving your scientific literacy, your knowledge of biology, how how things work and history, then you'll discover amazing things that will make you care. And by history, I don't mean modern human history as it's taught in schools, because that only encompasses a few hundreds of thousands of years. I'm talking about natural history, the history of the planet and the universe, billions of years of stuff that we need to look after. So how can you do that? Maybe the first step, learn about one of these groups that you're maybe interested in. Try and identify all the trees around about you, birds, wildflowers, maybe mushrooms, I don't know, invertebrates, insects. If you learn the names of things and you can recognize them and spot them, and you go out and you observe, then you'll see what they're doing, you'll see their behaviors. Yeah, that's ultimately that's what makes people care. Then teach others about it. The second is about stuff, right? So consumerism and materialism, ultimately that's what's driving the economic engine. Stuff we don't really need, but is there, so we will buy it if we've got disposable income. And that's all sold to us through brilliant advertising ploys by huge companies. We all buy from them. They manipulate us into buying clothes and TVs and a new phone every few years and toys, a new car. It's all stuff that we don't really need. If you can live without it, then you can live without it. And the main thing is that, unlike maybe 100 years ago, things today are not made to last a long time. They're in fact made deliberately not to last a long time. I don't know about any of you, but I've had a few phones over the last few years and they seem to last exactly the length of my contract, and then they stop working almost to the day. And there's actually, going back again in time, light bulb companies got together and they made a pact that they would make light bulbs that only lasted a certain amount of time and then they would break, so that everyone had to keep buying light bulbs. Well, this is true of pretty much everything. Yeah, so we use enormous amounts of resources to make all this stuff. Again, it's at the expense of nature. It's just a quick example. This is how fast fashion is produced, mostly in the Middle East. There's lots of socio-economic impacts to think about as well. It's not just the environment. But the demand that Westerners have for cheap, generally poorly made bits of clothing drives this whole industry. And it's really not necessary. So if you do buy high quality things, sure, they'll be more expensive, but they will last 10 times as long. And the other thing, buy secondhand. So reusing shouldn't be about delaying something or throwing something away. Often there's lots of gimmicks about, oh, reuse this. I work in horticulture, so we see it using plastic cartons and cans and old things to make stuff. That's great for being creative and creating things, but we're not solving any problems when it comes to our waste. We're just delaying or maybe even preventing that piece of plastic or can actually being recycled, because it's then tainted in a way that it can't be recycled. And that brings me on to the next point, waste. So we all generate huge amounts of waste because of this consumerist lifestyle. Few things, plastic we all know about, it's a major problem. but also our food waste, furniture, all our electronics, which have got potentially toxic metals in them, so they're very difficult to dispose of. So the main thing, reduce what you use, but then also recycle if you can, reuse, give it to charity, try and use it for a bit longer. If you have food waste or paper or cardboard, composting is brilliant, because then you're making something that's nature's way of recycling, and those resources go back into the earth. This is just a bit of a shocking picture from Greenland. So it's the tundra in Greenland. So this is the point to make, that we can't blame these people, because many communities around the world, they've got no way to get rid of their waste that the modern way of life produces. In Scotland, in the UK, in Europe, we have brilliant waste management infrastructure in place, and it's easy. If you've got waste, you can get it recycled, you can get it picked up the same week, it's fine, and then it's gone. You don't need to think about it anymore. People that are living maybe in small remote communities in less economically well-off countries, they don't have that infrastructure. So getting rid of waste can be a real problem, especially plastic. It would be easy to get rid of card and food waste. But since the invention of plastic, how do you get rid of it if you can't recycle it or bury it? So a lot of communities around the world have no choice. They've got to dump it somewhere. Obviously, that can be done more sensibly than others, but, well. This is another thing. This is something we don't really think about in Europe, because indigenous communities have almost disappeared. But in our arrogance, we describe people that live off the land as poor. Just because someone or a community doesn't have money, it doesn't mean they're poor. They might be wealthy in family, in the environment, in their knowledge, in art, culture. So I've got a whole list of different indigenous peoples that have been incredibly persecuted by Westerners, by us Europeans, over the last few hundred years. The Aboriginal Australians still being persecuted today, and Native Americans, indigenous Amazonians. These are people that lived, and still do, many of them. They've lived off the land for thousands of years. And then Westerners, Europeans, mainly the British, the French, the Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, went in and destroyed everything. Made it illegal to speak their languages, even talk, dress their traditional way, play their music. But the point I'm making is, it may be the knowledge of these people that actually saves us in the end, because they've got oral traditions passed down for thousands of years. And the main thing, the one I'm thinking of is the Aboriginal Australians. So in Australia, bushfires are getting more and more frequent every year. The Aboriginal Australians, before Europeans went, they managed fires really well. They would burn seasonally, do small burns, and that meant there wasn't a build-up of dry fuel. And then when there was a fire, it doesn't turn into a blaze that's hundreds of miles across. And the elders, the Aboriginal Australians, not many of them are in government or in politics, but they're still saying to the Australian government, you can manage this much better. You could do these things. We did this for 50,000 years and we didn't have these problems, but they're not listened to and they continue to be persecuted. So it's a difficult one to do this in practice, other than maybe, I don't know, finding charities that do good work and donating to them, or if you live in one of these countries, being an activist for that stuff. But ultimately, a lot of knowledge about the natural world is still there, and we need to help these people. These are some Amazonians in Peru. I was looking on a big oil propaganda site, let's call it, and it says that 70% of the Peruvian Amazon is leased by the government to oil companies. And those oil companies can explore for oil. If they find oil, they can do whatever they want. Much of that Amazon is still inhabited by uncontacted tribes. These are people that live off the land. They know all the animals, they know all the plants, they know all the medicinal values of the plants. There may be one that cures cancer in there, we don't know. But basically, these big companies can go straight in and do whatever they want. And there was one example of, in the early 80s, Shell oil company. So we all buy our petrol from them in some way or another. They went in, contacted a tribe, and within 3 years, half of the tribe was dead because they introduced all these different viruses, diseases, to which these communities, because they're living uncontacted, they don't have any immunity to these diseases, and they very quickly die. So I'm going to come back to this much later on, but keep that in mind. Just an example. If you haven't seen Pocahontas, or you haven't seen it in a long time, you should definitely watch it again. Even if not, just listen to Colours of the Wind after this presentation. I think it's a beautiful song, and it really sums up that whole point of view about how we value the land and the connections between all of the different organisms on the planet and how we're part of that. This is the last big action, and it's about food. So ask where your food comes from and eat fewer animal products, simply because they have a much taxing role on the natural environment. Obviously, land which isn't farmed can be left for nature, can't it? And animal agriculture is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, which is driving global warming. But really, I don't want to talk about global warming. That's not the point of this. The point is, if humans were to eat the crops that are grown to feed farm animals, theoretically, we could feed an extra 3.5 billion people. So if you were to grow soy or maize and harvest all of those cereals, and then you ship them thousands of miles, and then you feed them to cows, had the people in the country that corn and soy was grown just eaten the corn and the soy, we would have a huge surplus of food. Okay? Obviously, digestion in animals is not very efficient. So all of those nutrients, a lot of that energy is just lost. It's gone. So it's not that meat and egg and dairy production in itself is a problem. It's that it's all done, not all of it, much of it, the majority of it is done unsustainably. So there's this huge trade between, let's say, just China and the United States. They trade soy and corn and meat between them instead of just growing it where they need it. And this, again, it's all to do with the big global system of finance and economics, right? We want this trade. Trade is good, isn't it? Right? But it's very, very inefficient, and it's just stupid when you break it all down. And this is just another point about where our food comes from and also how it's produced. So in the UK, only about half of what we eat in the UK is produced here. The rest comes from around the world. These are figures from the government, the UK government. The picture on the left, that's in Almeria in Spain, so-called Costa del Polythene. And this is where much of, it's just a vast area of plastic tunnels where a huge proportion of Europe's winter vegetables are grown. Look at the picture in the middle, that's just a picture of a lettuce, which is traveling 1,800 miles from there to the supermarket in Lanark. So there's no reason you can't grow a lettuce in Lanark. It's not difficult, but out of convenience and to sustain this global trade, we do this. And often a lot of these vegetables, because they're grown so intensively, they're a magnet for pests. So we've got to use pesticides, we've got to use all these horrible chemicals to kill all the bugs, the insects that might eat these crops. And it's not out of the ordinary for a lettuce to have residue of dozens of different pesticides on it. So that's a very good reason to make sure you wash your vegetables very well. Okay, now on to some smaller actions. So the big actions, they're very much about how do you live your life. These are big changes that you would have to make to your life, how you buy things, how you buy food, your transport. If you do these, it's going to make a big difference. If we all do it collectively, we could change the world. But that's going to need everyone working together, individuals, governments, and corporations. But there's obviously lots and lots of small things that you can do as well, which are going to benefit your local environment. And if you add all that up, then obviously that becomes a global benefit as well. So staying on food, if you can grow some of your own food or buy locally produced food, then that's great. You're reducing the environmental impact of what you're eating. I've got a few points. Remember, just because something's sold in a nice deli shop or it's wrapped up nice or whatever, that doesn't mean it's locally produced. There's lots of farm shops round about in the UK. If they're selling bananas, they're not grown in the UK. That's clear. So they're still selling, even though they may say that they're selling locally produced food, not all of it's locally produced. So you need to read the label or ask. I thought, so Scottish milk from a supermarket may have a lower impact than an avocado grown 10,000 miles away, right? So even though I just said that animal agriculture is very inefficient, a lot of it's really unsustainable, the argument for, in my opinion, veganism, it doesn't hold up. If your argument is you're vegan, sure, maybe you don't want to eat animal products, that's fine. But if your argument for being vegan or not eating these things is because of environmental impacts, then you're misguided. Because if you're eating an avocado from the other side of the world, then the impact of that getting to your plate is enormous versus you drinking milk from a cow that's just over there, okay? An idea, try growing some salad leaves or herbs this summer. It's really easy. I've got a YouTube channel. You could look on the YouTube channel and see how to do that if you don't know. So this in fact is the kitchen garden at Kew in London. So this is an amazing botanic garden. This is just a picture. They've got a huge variety of different crops in there. You could feed a small village from that space if it's done well. So it's this small scale organic food production. It's extremely productive and it's brilliant for biodiversity, but we're not going to be able to feed the world on it. We have to have some kind of large scale agriculture to feed 7 billion people. There's no other way about it. And also doing this kind of growing requires a huge amount of skill and knowledge to be able to do it consistently without crop failures, etc. Versus one person in a tractor can grow acres and acres of wheat or corn or whatever. So a second smaller action, I'm very passionate about this, planting native trees and other native plants. If you don't have a garden, there's definitely going to be tree planting projects, charities around about you that you can take part in. And if you plant a tree that has an instant effect in helping wildlife, if you have a flat, barren piece of land and you put trees in, within hours you will see birds landing on those trees, eating insects off those trees. And Scotland was, not too long ago in history, from my perspective of history, 1,000 years ago, Scotland was mostly forested. Now most of that forest is gone. And again, comes back to agriculture. It's been cleared so that we can have sheep. A single mature oak tree, which is probably the most iconic British tree, and from lots of Europe, there's oak trees in North America as well. One of these mature trees can support about 1,000 different species of insects, smaller plants, birds. So re-establishing our native woodlands should be extremely high on our priority list when it comes to protecting biodiversity. It's just showing you the Woodland Trust. Woodland Trust has planting days for schools, but also for adults and general sign-ups. The Woodland Trust, through donations, buys small pockets of land, which maybe was farmland, and then they use volunteers to replant native trees and re-establish native woodlands. Politics. If you can vote for greener policies, politicians and parties that promote greener policies, brilliant. Governments generally drag their heels and have been dragging their heels on these points. Again, comes back to economics, because if you prioritize planting large areas with trees that you're not going to do anything with, that's potentially taking away from a new airport or a new whatever, right? It's quite tricky to find politicians and parties that have constructive policies. And you need to remember that just because something's labelled as green, green often means renewable energy projects. That doesn't mean they're good for biodiversity. Renewable energy in the wrong place can be very, very bad for local biodiversity. So that's brilliant, right? Solar panels on an existing structure, you're getting free energy, you're not using up any extra space. Every house should have that if it makes sense. Whereas most of Scotland's renewable energy looks like this. This is a picture from, what is it, Scottish Power's website, and they're really proud of this picture. What I see when I look at this is there's no native trees there whatsoever. They've all been cleared. This has been probably a high, in terms of biodiversity, a really high value peatland with some native forest on it. It's been cleared. Maybe it was grazed by sheep for a few hundred years. Then it's been planted with this intensive non-native coniferous forest. If you look at all these trees, they're planted very close together. This is effectively a biodiversity desert. There's hardly any species living within this landscape. There'll be lots of insects, maybe migratory birds. There might be predatory birds living in the forestry itself, but generally in forestry, they're very dark places. And this is being combined with these big, huge wind turbines. So this, ultimately, this comes down to, again, financial interests had dictated how this land has been managed, how it's being used. The UK government has made really, really bad decisions about this, so has the Scottish government over the last few years. We're seeing some progress now. There's lots of ways that they could make this landscape far better. For a start, they could use native trees instead of these non-native conifers. The non-native conifers are really low value. They're good for paper and they're not good for much else. Firewood and paper, they're not good for building. You could easily plant Scots pine in there and oaks and things like that, which you could manage sustainably. It would have less initial impact. The financial reward would be delayed by a few tens of years, but the sustainability would be huge compared to how it's all being done at the moment. Short-term financial interests always come first, no matter what. Same goes for everything. That has to change if we're going to save life on Earth. Almost done. Last few actions. These are just a few things I thought, oh, maybe people don't know about these. We've never thought about it. First one is in spring, lots of our small songbirds are raising chicks. You shouldn't be feeding the birds stodgy foods at that time because chicks can choke really, really easily. And apparently, if you look at the RSPB's website, thousands and thousands of chicks are killed every year by food that people are putting out for the birds. You think you're doing a good deed, you're feeding the birds, helping them on. Actually, you're doing more harm than good. Second point, you could leave some areas of your garden to be a bit more natural. Longer grass is brilliant for insects, for moths, things that form the foundation of big food webs that are going to help all the birds and all that stuff. Don't leave your car engine idling. If you're stopped and waiting, turn off your engine. There's laws and rules about this in lots of countries around the world where you'd actually get fined. Not so in the UK. And it's actually a big problem, especially outside schools. People tend to get a bit annoyed because parents are dropping off kids, there's big queues, and they just leave their engine running. Engines obviously create lots of particulates, lots of pollution, as well as greenhouse gases. So if you're not using it, turn it off. Help out in a local litter pick. Don't waste power. Wildlife ponds are brilliant. Helping all sorts of wildlife, even from a small puddle, small pond, keep it topped up with water. Bird boxes. And again, everything always comes back to money. If you have a pension fund or you have investments, ask where your money is invested. If you're invested in, what was it, last week there was a big British mining company which blew up a cave in Australia which had continuous habitation for 45,000 years. So Aboriginal Australians are a really sacred place. The mining company blew it up to expand their iron mine. This is a place that people have been living continuously for tens of thousands of years. So it's very, very likely if you have a pension fund in the UK, your pension fund will own a small part of that company. So ask questions, don't just go along with it. And then chemicals, things like bleach. Bleach, lots of us will use bleach to clean toilets, to clean our bathrooms, our kitchens. If you don't need it, don't use it. If you really need it, sure. Eventually that bleach will find its way, so use it sparingly and only when necessary. And the final one's back to our planet. So remember, all of this is happening on this small planet. And I looked at this 1 week ago. 1 week ago, there was this number of humans on the planet. In the last week, there's now an extra 4 million people. So the population of Scotland's 5.4 million. So in 1 week, almost the entire population of Scotland has been added to the world. This year, so far, there's an extra 35 million people on the planet. Okay, that's a huge number of people. Soon there's going to be 8 billion people. Maybe in 10 years, there could be 10 billion people, which means we need more stuff, we need more infrastructure, we need more food. If we just continue as we are, then the damage is going to be irreparable. It's going to be too late. And we're governments are waking up to that on climate, but not so much on our dependence on biodiversity, on plants, on trees, on the whole system of things working together. And that's it. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the text box and Melissa will read them out.
Yep, so I think we can stop sharing your screen just now, Stuart. Thank you very much. That was a really interesting talk, and it was great to kind of look at the big picture and then getting right down to the little things that we can all actually do in our day-to-day lives. Yeah, it's the big picture. That's the main thing. I think for too long we've thought about recycling and the small things, whereas it's the big things, changing actually our lifestyles, how we live. That's what's going to make a difference. So we've had a couple of questions come in. So the first one is from Larissa, who's in Fife here in Scotland. She's asking about things that we can do to support local insects, especially bees, as she's been going on her daily walks in Fife and has noticed a lot of dead bees. And so she's wondering what we can do to support the bees, and right now if there are any specific diseases which are killing the bees in that area. Okay, so bees in the UK, I think there's about 270 different species of bees in the UK. When you see bees in the media, often they're talking about honeybees. Honeybees are just one species, and they're not actually native to Scotland. They can't survive on their own without a nice cozy hive put there by a person. So the main bees that we need to look out for are bumblebees, which there's lots of different species of bumblebees, and solitary bees. Bumblebees live in small colonies. They live in groups of about 100 to 300. And they're started by one queen, which flies, she hibernates over the winter and she flies early in the spring around March, and she will establish a nest. If she couldn't find enough food, or she couldn't find a place to nest, then that could be why she's died.
It's really important that there's early flowering plants for the early queen bumblebees to find. So dandelions and daisies, things that flower really, really early, are good food for them because there's not much else around. Another thing is willow trees. So we've got lots of native willow trees. Again, lots of them have been cut down and cleared over the last few hundred years. So if you can plant willow trees, don't cut your grass so much, let some dandelions grow. We're seeing a lot more now. The local councils aren't cutting road verges quite as much, especially with the lockdown. There's been tons and tons of dandelions and wildflowers round about for the bees to feast on. Another thing is they need suitable nesting places. So bumblebees, most of them, the big ones, will nest in cavities and walls. And again, lots of our old walls, dry stone walls and things have been fallen into disrepair. They've fallen down. Stone buildings have fallen into disrepair. And that's reducing the number of nesting sites. So if you could create an artificial nesting site, you could just Google how to do that. So that's two things. Shelter, same as everything. Shelter, food, water, it's what they need. So we need to think about all the different ways we can provide those.
Brilliant, great, thank you very much. Next question is from Shravanthi in India, and they're saying that in India, locusts are a huge problem for plants and crops, and a lot of farmers are using a lot of pesticides, obviously, to protect the plants. Yeah. So they're asking, which is obviously then killing all of the locusts. Yeah. They're asking how you can stop the locusts from being killed in these mass numbers, but still protect the crops and the plants that the farmers are trying to grow. Which is a tough one, I think. Tricky one.
Yeah. So I think locusts and lots of things related to locusts, they tend to have periods where there's not many of them, and they breed underground, and then every few years you tend to get these enormous swarms. I think billions of insects which will fly, and I'm sure it's devastating for farmers seeing one of these swarms coming. I think that's probably one of the situations where if you have to use chemicals, then you have to. I think I've read about smoke. Traditionally, smoke would be used before chemicals. So going again back to traditional methods, if you kind of build big pyres of green waste and burn those to produce lots of smoke when you know there's a swarm coming, that would deter, maybe not all, but maybe it would deter a huge amount of the locusts from actually landing on the crops, and they would just keep flying. But the thing with plant pests, especially for crops, if you grow a small amount of one crop, like the picture we saw at Kew Garden, in the kitchen garden, that's not a target for a pest. Each different crop has a different plant pest, a different insect or a different bird, something that will eat it. They're infected by different viruses and different bacteria as well. So for example, the same insect won't eat a potato plant as would eat some corn. So the more variety of different plants that we grow, it's like an insurance policy. If we're relying 80% on rice, or 80% on corn, or 80% on potatoes, where all of our eggs are in one basket there. So if something comes along, then you're in trouble. I mean, there's millions of plant species going back to that tree of life, there's potentially tens of thousands of edible plant species, and the whole world relies on about 6 or 7 for most of our calories. All cereals, corn, wheat, potatoes, rye, mostly grains, mostly grasses in the grass family. So we're not insuring ourselves very well. We should be growing a bigger variety, and that would also give us more nutrition as well. We would have to rely less on supplements and things like that. Kind of went off topic there, but
no, that's all really interesting. Thank you. Probably a short question. This is from myself, as someone who does or has put bread out for the birds. What is it just seed that we should be giving them instead of sort of human food, as you would call it?
So it's fine to give small pieces of bread during the winter and fat balls as well. That's good. As long as you're not doing it excessively, then you will be helping the adult birds through the winter in some way. But for nestlings, for chicks, the parents, they don't need much help at this time of year, because they'll be feeding the chicks on insects, like really protein and fat rich insects. And during this time of year in Scotland, there's a huge abundance of insects. So if let's say there's blue tits or whatever, they don't need any help.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's mostly the pigeons that come to my garden anyway. Okay, thank you. Next, we've got a couple of different questions about COVID-19, so I'll kind of join them together. So Yvonne and Sajad have both raised points. So on one hand, Sajad is asking, has the COVID-19 lockdown helped biodiversity by everyone being stuck in their houses and not driving their cars and so on? But then Yvonne is raising the point that because of the pandemic, everyone's been encouraged to sort of bleach everything and use antibacterial stuff everywhere, and we're also seeing out on the ground there's plastic gloves, plastic masks being left everywhere, so it's kind of two sides to it. So just to get your thoughts on that.
So in terms of benefits, I think I've seen pictures from all around the world of animals that wouldn't normally be out that are out because there's not people around. I think there was the canals in Venice. There's been dolphins and lots of fish and things in these canals, which are normally so murky with people with the boats churning up all the sediment. I've read about in Yosemite National Park in the US, there's all the bears which normally kind of hide and feed up in the mountains are down walking along roads and feeding in the lowlands. So I'm sure that's really special for the park rangers that are there just on their own. Normally there's millions of visitors. So it's just showing that these big animals are afraid of humans, and they generally do. They stay away. So there's, as long as, I guess the main issue is that they encroach on our animal agriculture. Carnivores tend to come in and take young animals from farms, and that's a huge problem in Scotland. So there's definite benefits. Obviously, if there's less people, then wildlife's going to do better. Like I was saying before about the bees, land management has changed a lot over the last couple of months because the park managers and the people that maintain road verges haven't been out cutting. So there's an abundance of wildflowers for pollinators, for the bees. So I'm sure we'll see the numbers of the surveys that come out later in the year. about what the real impact has been. In terms of waste, if people are going to fling plastic on the ground, then they're going to do it either way, I think. That all comes down to education, and it comes down to schools. Perhaps people that are set in their ways can't be reached, but we can definitely reach younger children and make sure that we're teaching constantly about best practice and sustainability, etc. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. What have we got next? There was one, where's it going? So Sarim is asking, so they're in the Middle East, where there's a clear lack of renewable resources and fossil fuel is cheaper than water. And they're asking if you could give some advice on how, and if you live in a country like that, how you can take step forwards to a more sustainable environment. So if you live in a place like the Middle East, how can you live a more sustainable life?
Okay. So I suppose that there's lots of things you would think about. I suppose the main two would be energy and food. Obviously, from the impacts of climate change are being felt pretty hard again already in the Middle East. I think records are being broken quite quickly. I think there was records of 60 degrees Celsius in the sun in Iran last year.
Oh my goodness.
So it's actually beyond the temperature at which humans can survive, because we sweat to cool down. There's a certain point where if it's too hot, you literally cannot cool your body down by sweating. So I guess that buildings and how buildings are designed is really important to make sure that you can escape somewhere cool. And all you need to look at is the traditional methods from hundreds and thousands of years ago of using mud and sustainable materials from the earth, because those, and cave dwellings as well, brilliant. We should all be looking at that in hot places. Doesn't mean just because it's a cave in the earth doesn't mean it can't be modern and beautiful. Just thinking about these ways, how can we use the earth without damaging it? Obviously, we need to think about lots of different ways to produce energy. In places like the Middle East, solar should be everywhere. That oil should be being used to build the infrastructure, the renewable infrastructure at a rapid pace. That's what makes sense. But obviously, we know governments have a mind of their own sometimes. I don't know if water is an issue as well. If water becomes an issue for irrigating crops, then yeah, there's so many different things to think about.
Great, thank you. Right, next I've got one, and Vita's sharing some thoughts here. They think that if they had to pinpoint the problem with humans causing this level of destruction, which we can see around the world, that it's due to our competitive streak, which is driven since a young age, so basically starting at sort of primary school. And Anvita's asking if you had to introduce a scheme in school to reduce this competitiveness and allow children to see and accept the results based on fate and chance, what would it be?
Oh, that's a big question.
I
know. Okay. I think education systems, I can only speak for the education system in the UK because that's the only thing I've got experience of. In the UK, in schools, you learn about subjects, individual subjects. You do maths, English, you may choose to do an art or a science. And then there's so much stress to pass exams that the context doesn't settle in. Schools should have projects, much more projects, which incorporate all of these different subjects. That's what makes most sense. If you have teamwork, doing a project maybe on that combines artistic elements, design, literacy, science, working as teams to solve a problem. Let's say, let's create creative solutions to it being too hot in the Middle East. How do we do this? And give a group of 4 students that. You need to write a report, you need to create designs. And I think that's the way that education should be going, because I know when I came out of school, you've got a bit of knowledge in a few different subjects, but you don't know how to put them together. You don't know how human history relates to natural history, or English relates to human history, or the history of language relates to human history, of course, as does art. And art is influenced by nature. Surely that would reduce competitiveness if students were working together on projects, as well as giving them a bit more of a world view.
Yeah, put a bit more in context, I guess.
Yeah. Great,
thank you. We had another question there. Where's it gone? Josanne is asking what your opinion is on rewilding and animal reintroductions in Scotland, for example, the lynx.
Okay. So basically, and for those of you who don't know, Scotland used to have all of those big animals. It used to have grizzly bears, wolves, lynx, beavers, wild boar, aurochs, which are huge bulls, and they're all gone now. So we only have small animals. We've got some wild deer, we've got rabbits, nothing exciting. So there's a lot of ideas going around about trying to reintroduce some of these animals, and some reintroductions already been done in private estates, mainly in the Highlands of Scotland. So there are some large estates with wolves. There's been beaver reintroductions in the West Coast, and let's say gorilla reintroductions of beavers, i.e. people's, not gorillas.
Oh, gorillas in Scotland.
Gorilla.
Gorilla.
So basically people bringing in animals like beavers and intentionally releasing them into the wild because they believe that they should be there. There's now wild boar as well now, I believe. Lynx. So lynx are forest-dwelling cats. They're predators, but generally they live in the forest and they would hunt deer. So in terms of all of the carnivores that we could reintroduce to Scotland, lynx is probably way up there, because we've got a huge problem with deer because there's nothing to control them. What deer do is we're trying to reforest lots of the Highlands of Scotland, but deer come in and they eat the very young trees. So that makes introducing new trees very difficult. So if we had a predator that would control them, that would be great. And I think there's lynx in Scandinavia, and there's not much evidence that they tend to predate on lambs, so farm animals. They're quite reclusive. They stay in the forest. So I think I think that would be a good idea.
Okay, Josanne's just saying their view is that if the habitat is there, they should be introduced.
I think it will happen. If you don't know about Trees for Life, which is in the Highlands of Scotland. They're trying to re-establish a lot of the Caledonian pine forests. I think eventually they will try and do a project like reintroducing the lynx. Because again, it's all about the connections. If you introduce lynx, you keep the deer numbers down, and then the plants will recover, which is going to help everything else. So it's, yeah, they would help create that natural habitat as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, I think that's us. We've had all our questions. Larissa was asking something else about the bees, but she's had to leave, so I've said we'll follow up individually with her on our email address. Excellent. So yeah, thank you very much, Stuart. That was really interesting and informative. And thank you to everyone from around the world who's joined us tonight. As I said, we've been recording the sessions, so after we've finished, that will be going online on our website, which I've posted a link to in the chat box, and also our Facebook page if you're on Facebook. We've got a few more workshops coming up in June and July, and everything's virtual at the moment because of lockdown. And I suppose one positive of that is that anyone in the world really can join in. So hopefully we might see some of you at our future workshops. So thank you again to Stuart and everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.